DVB, Digital Fast.
Hello and welcome to DVB Newsroom. I'm your host Nora. Joining me today is Vicky Bowman, a British diplomat, former UK ambassador to Myanmar, and the director of Myanmar Centre for Responsible Business. Thanks for being here today, Vicky.
Nice to see you, Nora.
Can you tell us about the Myanmar Centre for Responsible Business? How did it promote ethical business practices in Myanmar before the 2021 military coup?
So we set up Myanmar Centre for Responsible Business, MCRB, in 2013. And what we were doing was basing it on the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. So that's a three-pillar framework. Governments have a duty to protect human rights. Businesses have a responsibility to respect human rights. And both government and businesses need to provide remedy when there are abuses. So we were applying that international framework to businesses, whether they were foreign businesses, Myanmar businesses, and looking at particular sectors. And as part of that, one of the key things we were doing was analysing the legal framework, the policy framework, because it's not all about what businesses do. It's fundamentally about how they are regulated by companies, by governments, pardon me. And so we looked at things like mining, tourism, tech sector, private security, oil and gas, but also at some of the cross-cutting issues like biodiversity and human rights, land law, land rights, indigenous peoples, discrimination. And we particularly worked on LGBT plus and disability inclusion. And one of the things we also did was arrange both multi-stakeholder discussions, so around things like digital rights, and also collective action, like, for example, getting companies to fly the rainbow flag on Ida Hot Day, which is all about LGBT inclusion. So different ways of trying to influence both companies, but also the government, the regulatory framework, to make it more conducive to responsible business.
And what about other businesses before the 2021 coup? How was corporate accountability and human rights among businesses in Myanmar?
Well, I think it really varied. It varies according to the type of business, the sector, the legislation, as I said. So you can't say, it was all good or it was 92% or anything. It really varied. And what we discovered was that there were certain sectors which really were so badly regulated and badly enforced, you could pretty much not find any responsible business there. Mining is absolutely a sector like that. There were others, such as the garment sector, where you had some international brands sourcing who were very good at doing social audits, at getting involved, at visiting their supplier factories. There were others who were completely hands-off. So that meant there was more chance of labour rights abuses. And then within the Myanmar companies sector, you had some companies who really understood the value of improving their corporate governance, their transparency and their disclosure, and some who didn't understand it at all and just used to think of what I was doing. They would say, oh, we do a lot of CSR. And I'd say, oh, right, a lot of responsibility. What do you mean by that? Oh, we give lots of money to pagodas and schools. Now, that wasn't what we were working on. What we were working on was respecting human rights and obeying the law. So very mixed. And what we were trying to do was incentivize and encourage better behavior through things like our Puintissa Transparency in Myanmar Enterprises benchmark, because companies, or at least the ones who wanted to do more, wanted to be at the top of that benchmark.
Then the 2021 coup changed everything, including for you personally. In 2022, you and your husband, Burmese artist Thailin, were arrested in Yangon. After your years of service in Myanmar, how did that experience affect you personally?
Well, it was very interesting because I have so many friends, including, of course, my husband, who has been in jail before. So I'd heard all of their stories of their time in jail. But if this was the chance to really experience it myself firsthand. So it was a bit, in a way, like a kind of field trip. There were positives. I was kind of digitally detoxed for 3 months, which was great. I got to do a lot more exercise. I was walking about 8 miles a day, round and round the cell block. I was healthier when I came out than when I went in, and slimmer. I read novels, which I'd not had time to do over the years of learning Burmese. I was reading Ponyakin and Jew and any of the books I could find there. And I was able to meet a lot of interesting people, because sadly, Myanmar jails are full of extremely interesting, talented people. And for some of them, I was able to do English language practice and discuss issues, helping them to, understand things like federalism or, disability inclusion. So it was interesting, and certainly increased my personal interest in prison reform, both Myanmar prison reform, but also actually UK prison reform, where we have many of the same issues around prison conditions and failure to rehabilitate prisoners. But I guess the downside of it really was the stress it caused for my colleagues, for my family members, for my friends. And it also led to the end of Myanmar Centre for Responsible Business. After I was released, we gradually wound it up because I wasn't in the country, and many of my colleagues had decided that they were too scared to continue working. So although our work remains online and I'm keeping it up on the website until 2030, we've had to basically end both the operation in Myanmar, and now we're kind of delisting the legal entity in the UK, and obviously our funding has all stopped as well. So what I'm trying to do now is work remotely, really, with other partner organizations.
You were released later that year in a prisoner amnesty and deported from Myanmar. Does this mean you can't return to Myanmar?
So sadly not. For the time being, although I've applied for a visa, I haven't got one. And also Tain Lin has applied to have his Myanmar passport renewed, and he hasn't got that. So I haven't seen him now for 2.5 years. But as I say, I'm still working remotely. I'm working with organisations like Eurocham Myanmar, the EU-funded Made in Myanmar programme on the garment sector, Myanmar Sustainable Business Network, which was something that we set up together with UNDP and YIVA to kind of bring together people who were still committed to responsible, sustainable business. So there's different things that I can do in Myanmar from a distance. But also what I've been doing is taking some of the lessons from our work in Myanmar out to a global audience, particularly in the debate about what to do in conflict-affected countries, responsible business there, issues around whether or not to stay or to go. But I'm also, for example, the chair of Global Network Initiative, which works on the tech sector and the right to privacy and the right to freedom of expression and how to regulate that. And that's something that we do with global big tech companies, NGOs, academics, investors, also telecoms companies. And my interest in that started from what I was doing in Myanmar.
Since then, the business climate has changed a lot. When it comes to ethical businesses in Myanmar, two civil society groups are suing Telenor for sharing user data with the military after the coup. Reports say that the regime ordered Telenor Myanmar and other telecoms to hand over user data and install intercept technology. Did any companies try to resist or refuse these orders? What's your view on the Telenor case?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know exact details of the legal case that these NGOs are going to pursue, and it's all around Norwegian law. But I do want to highlight that of all the companies we worked with over 10 years in Myanmar, Telenor was the best in terms of doing heightened human rights due diligence, in terms of its transparency, in terms of its participation in the multi-stakeholder dialogue we had on digital rights. And the fact that they gave data to the authorities is uncontested because they've reported on that ever since 2015. It's an obligation of telecoms companies throughout the world. And if you go and look on Telenor's website, you can see this. And I was looking yesterday at they're called authority requests for historical data. So it's about metadata, the data about where the phone was physically, which numbers it connected to. So I was looking in 2019, they had 70 requests and they gave data over for 86% of those. It went up to 97 in 2020. They gave 94%. It went up to 153 in 2021. They gave over 96%. So there was a gradual increase. However, compare that to Thailand. They gave almost 15,000, or they received 15,000 requests for data in 2020, and they gave 100% of those. So this is a very normal part of telecoms operation. And what was important about Telenor is it spotted the risks in the law from day one. So the 2013 telecoms law basically has no human rights safeguards in it. It says the authorities can have data whenever they want, and the company, the license holder, has to comply. Telenor saw that as part of their human rights due diligence as a big risk and raised it with us and said back in 2013 they wanted to work with us and to try to get safeguards written into the law. So we worked a lot with them throughout that time. And during that time, they were very open about how they were currently managing those risks, including this question of real-time live interception equipment, which to my knowledge, up until the day they left, they had not activated. That's what they've said. And I have no reason not to believe that, not least because to have activated it would have been to be in contravention with EU sanctions. There are sanctions since 2018 on dual-use equipment, of which internet interception is one of those. And so that's one of the reasons why Telenor was trying to get proper safeguards written into the law and wasn't activating it up until then, to my knowledge. So we'll see how the legal case comes out, but there is no question of them having to have handed over data. And there's also no question that after the coup, it became much more high risk, because to push back in the way that they'd done under the NLD and say, we will only give it for certain types of data, which is why they had this sort of 86% acceptance rate, that was not possible when you had people who were basically threatening your staff. And we know these aren't idle threats. They put me in jail. They also put people from banks in jail who tipped off customers who were going to have their accounts frozen. So these were the real risks that Telenor had to deal with. And it was obviously the key reason why they decided to exit the country.
Despite the current environment, are there still any businesses in Myanmar trying to stay ethical and maintain accountability now?
So again, it's a spectrum of activity, and it's also important that the issues that businesses face are not specifically about ethical behaviour. A lot of them are very real operational issues, such as import restrictions, foreign exchange restrictions, safety and security. But one of the things they need to do is ensure that they respond to those challenges ethically. So the challenges themselves have the operational challenges is what led many companies over the last 4 or 5 years to exit, but not all of them have. And those that have stayed are trying to make greater efforts, particularly within the garment sector. You have a number of brands who have joined the Made in Myanmar program, which is a way of working together on some of the issues, such as, for example, wages, but also it's eyes and ears on the ground for those brands in Europe who have maybe 1 or 2 supplier factories. They can't be there all the time, but they are able to use the intelligence and networks that the Made in Myanmar program has, so that they're quickly alerted if there are any problems that they need to address. So you have that kind of collective action with programs like Made in Myanmar. It's also a sector, the garment sector, which again, through the operational challenges, is ironically becoming more responsible in terms of its energy supply, because it's moving from coal-fired boilers. The last of those are being taken out of service in factories, but also putting solar on the rooftop. So in the last 2 years, there's been an increase from 1 megawatt to 15 megawatts of solar power on those factories themselves. So all of those things are efforts they're making against a really difficult business climate. And then the other thing I think to remember is it's really important they're providing jobs. And the garment sector provides something like, I think, 430,000 jobs, according to MGMA's latest estimates, although obviously it goes up and down. And they also were active in providing support after the earthquake, relief, and other companies in logistics and so on were providing practical support. So in different ways, there are many, both foreign companies and Myanmar companies, who are continuing to do what they can to operate in really difficult circumstances.
Looking to the future, if Myanmar returns to democracy, how can responsible businesses help rebuild the economy?
So I wouldn't say one should wait until we return to democracy. We don't know when that will be, sadly. It's always really important to try and build a responsible economy because it's what people depend on to live, to eat. There's not enough humanitarian aid in the world to support Myanmar people, with food, let alone with all the other competing factors from Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan and so on. So I wouldn't say that companies should wait before trying to build a responsible, sustainable economy, notwithstanding all the challenges I've mentioned. What's different right now is, at least from foreign businesses, is there's a pause on any kind of advocacy towards the authorities because companies are not engaging directly with the authorities. To some extent, foreign companies engage via the Union of Myanmar Chamber of Commerce when there are particular issues that they want to send messages on things like the minimum wage, on things like the impacts of conscription on their staff. So those are all things which are continuing. The one thing I really want to flag up, though, because it's often forgotten, and I think it's going to be a major issue now and in the future, is disability. Because this conflict has led to a huge number of people who have new physical disabilities and also many who have mental trauma as well. And what we've seen over the years globally is that wars tend to lead to countries rather, UK, Germany, Japan after the Second World War, taking more efforts to support people with disabilities to get jobs. I'd like to see that happening now, again, not waiting. It's something we worked on since 2014 with MCRB, and we did plenty of guidance and discussions with companies and with government at the time on how to do this. And I think it's going to be really important for the future. What was quite interesting when we did our work was that of all of the government entities and quasi-government entities, the one that really understood this was the War Veterans Organization, precisely because they have that experience of their own members affected by physical disability. So it was interesting for me to discover that many of these military-run factories and also some state-owned enterprises like Myanmar Insurance had an active recruitment policy for disabled war veterans. Now, I want to see that kind of support available within all companies, not just to people who have been military combatants, but to civilian people with disabilities, whether it's from landmines, whether it's from airstrikes. I think this is going to be hugely important for these people in the future, and we need to start making those efforts now. The other day, I was watching a film featuring Toru Kubota, the Japanese journalist who was released the same day as me, and there was a very inspiring photojournalist who now goes by the name of Chikan Crow, and he works up in Mae Sot as a war photographer, but with only one leg, a prosthetic leg, because of the injury that he experienced. So I want to see more examples of this, and I want to see it more in the mainstream economy.
So what about the international support from your perspective? What should the international community or regional countries do differently to support ethical investment in Myanmar?
Well, one of the things they can do, as I've just said, is support people with disabilities to get jobs in businesses, because some of that will take international support through NGOs who are experts in this. Beyond that, I think it's really important that companies and their host governments, their home governments rather, don't do what I see, for example, the Chinese government frequently does, which is say, all of our companies abide by local law. And that's their kind of answer when everyone says that those companies are not behaving responsibly. Now, the local legal framework, as I've mentioned, is extremely weak from a human rights perspective, certainly in issues like mining, where it's deeply confused. And we did work on this over the years. We did a workshop in Sagaing back in March 2019, which just showed how much inconsistency there was between land law in the agriculture department, GAD and land permits, the environment department, the mining department. It was a disaster for companies. So Chinese or indeed other governments and their companies saying we abide by local law is not good enough. They need to be applying the UN guiding principles. Their companies need to respect human rights. And it would be good to see some of those countries, as is happening gradually, like Korea, and we hear it also from Thailand, starting to make it more mandatory for their companies who are based in their countries, if they're working overseas, to be doing human rights due diligence, to be respecting human rights. So that's one thing I would like to see more of. I also think that from a market perspective, it's really important that the EU should not take blanket decisions to close off its market or abandon the tariff preferences it offers just because Myanmar has a bad political situation, because that has a negative impact on companies who are trying to do the right thing. I mean, the other day, the EU announced under its deforestation regulation that high-risk countries were Russia, Belarus, Myanmar, and North Korea. Now, that's ridiculous. That is just a politically expedient way to do something picking on those countries where there is no political cost, but not actually to highlight the countries like Brazil and Indonesia where there is real deforestation risk. So I don't want to see Myanmar jobs become a victim to these kind of political games. It's really important to focus on what is actually going on the ground in the economy and in what companies do, and to support those companies who are creating and maintaining jobs responsibly.
Despite all these problems, do you still have hope for the return of responsible and ethical business practices in Myanmar?
Well, I'm not convinced that they've gone away, as I hope I've convinced you, Nora, in what I've just said. But to get a better standard, to go back to where we were moving towards back in that period, 2013 to 2021, we obviously, above all, need a solution to the political crisis. We need genuine stability. We need better governance. That's a given. In the meantime, though, I think it's really important to keep the formal economy alive if we're going to be able to build on that. Because if companies leave, they are not going to come rushing back after some sort of democratic change. They will look at Myanmar as a very high-risk market, and it no longer has that kind of sparkle that it had back in 2012. All of those things that brought in both foreign investment and also foreign aid, that's not in place anymore. Aid budgets have been cut. We've seen it from USAID, but it's not just USAID. So it's something where what we have, we need to preserve. And that's why I get very distressed, both when I see the sort of scorched earth policies being pursued by the Tatmadaw, but also the scorched earth of policies being pursued by certain activists as this kind of Chwemanai Chimine show, burning down the barn because you can't control the rats. I really don't want to see a world in which Myanmar's formal economy has been destroyed just for political expediency, because it will be so difficult to build on that in future. What will end up being there, instead of good companies, is organised crime. It's going to be corruption. It's already there growing in the sort of the ashes of bits of the economy. Let's not actually accelerate that. That makes no sense. Then the other thing that I think we really need is better understanding from those who will be and would be regulators and parliamentarians from whatever party they are, of how to regulate business, how to implement and enforce that, including in a federal framework, a federal democratic framework. Again, I keep referring back to mining, but for me, it's a core thing. You've got to get that right so that Indigenous people's rights are respected, so that the taxation system works in the right way, so that it all ties up with good land use planning, environmental permitting. So far, all we've seen in Myanmar over the last 10, 15 years and before is bad regulation, bad policy, bad practice. So I really hope that those who are in whatever position they are now are working on that and learning from other countries about how it's done better. Because if they come into power, whoever they are, and don't understand some of these issues. Regulating the tech sector is another question, which we, never found governments really understanding what we were saying. If they don't have that understanding, then we won't see responsible business, and it doesn't matter who is in charge.
So before we wrap up, is there anything you would like to say to the people of Myanmar today?
Well, I've said most of it already, and I don't have any particular, I have many messages for individuals, but perhaps not for the whole people of Myanmar, other than Yandu Myo Ngaba Toka Ma Kimwe Chabase, may you be free of 5 enemies, fire, flood, kings, thieves, and those who wish you ill.
Thank you for your time today, Vicky.
Thank you.